father of Hollywood.com, along with Truthwins.com, presents Dreamland New Beginnings, written by Dr. Galen Whitley Keith, narrated by Keith Whitley. Chapter 3. Hobart Johnstone Whitley had become not only a man, but a man admired. His boyhood features, once softened by grief and uncertainty, had given way to a striking countenance. He stood tall, over 6 feet, broad in shoulder, his dark hair swept neatly, and a carefully groomed mustache adding distinction and gravity to his face. His eyes still carried that same gentle kindness, yet behind them burned a resolve lit by loss and sharpened by ambition. When people looked upon him in Chicago, bustling capital of the Midwestern trade, they saw promise and possibility. Now he stood in the quiet luxury of his chamber, a stately room lined with rich brocade curtains of deep crimson, gilded lamps, and mahogany furniture polished until it glowed in the lamplight. Before the grand wardrobe mirror, he adjusted his bow tie with deliberate care, drawing each fold into order. His clothing spoke of both heritage and pride. The Prince Charlie coat of fine black cloth with its sleek lapels, paired with the Johnston tartan kilt cascading in sharp pleats down his frame, its green, blue, and red pattern bright against the shadowed room. He looked every inch the figure of a gentleman, but his mind was far away. From his vest pocket he withdrew his silver pocket watch engraved with delicate filigree. He opened it not to check the hour, but to gaze at the small miniature portraits within. The faces of his parents smiled back at him, Joseph's stern jaw tempered by his spectacles, Eleanor's softer features radiant even upon the tiny glass. Years had passed since they were lost, years since a sheriff's voice had broken his youth in the Whitley Library with the words, "Your father and mother are gone." The weight of that moment had never fully left him. He thought now of those nights when even success could not stifle loneliness, of the countless hours bent over lamplight, determined not to let his family name wither. "If I give up my dreams, then they die with me," he whispered, repeating the vow that had carried him through fire. His thought next journeyed back to the evening, when sank into a great overstuffed chair beside the hearth. The collie at his feet stirred, a patient companion with a muzzle now dusted with gray. 2 tall stacks of books flanked him like sentinels of wisdom, their spines heavy with European philosophy, American business treatises, and novels that still fed his imagination. The fire glowed steadily while the amber light of the kerosene lamp burned at his elbow. On the table sat a copper mug filled with steaming coffee and a plate of fresh scones, their golden crusts gleaming in the lamplight. He took up a book, read until the flames blurred, then closed it with reverence and set it aside. Reaching for a scone, he broke its crust and chewed slowly, savoring its warmth. The collie stirred, lifted its ears, and looked at him eagerly. H.J. chuckled softly, tore a piece, and offered it to him. "Even you must have reward, old fellow," he said, stroking the dog's head. Taking a sip from the copper mug, the bitter richness steadied him. Yet even standing in the calm, his mind wandered to the mercantile in Chicago, his mercantile. He remembered it clearly, as though the flicker of the bold letters above the central register jogged his memory. Whitley Mercantile conjured the sight. Inside, the store bustled with the heartbeat of Chicago. Clerks served with efficiency, one lifting a shotgun toward the calloused hands of a farmer who weighed it with nodding approval, another unfurling bolt of fine cloth before the careful judgment of a society lady draped in fur. At the center of the store stood H.J. himself, speaking animatedly with one of the city's railroad executives. That handshake had mattered, the conversation lively yet purposeful, and those who stopped to watch knew they stood witness to a rising man. The Rock Island Railroad stretched its empire across vast maps, each line a promise of steel and progress. H.A., now an employee of the railroad, bent over charts with steady conviction, his hand circling places that others dismissed as mere prairies of wind and grass. Where some men saw emptiness, he envisioned crossroads of trade, farms blooming into towns, and towns blossoming into cities. His voice was calm but assured, edged with the certainty of a man who could already see what the future would become. And in that quiet certainty lay his power, for he possessed the rare gift of seeing opportunity where others saw nothing at all. But among those memories, one seared itself brightest the day he saw her, Fanny. She emerged upon a crowded Chicago street like a vision, dressed in a fashionable gown with a tight waist and bustle sweeping behind, parasol glinting as she tilted it against the light. She moved with grace so certain that wagons slowed, laborers stopped mid-haul, and 6 men unloading crates stood frozen, whispering among themselves as they stared. From his office window, H.J. too had stopped, his breath caught, his heart thundered. He shot to his feet, hat in hand, and hurried outside. But the street was wide, her pace brisk, and he dared not call out. He quickened his stride, boots striking sharp upon the walkway. Then just as she neared the end of the avenue, she paused. She turned her head lightly, shoulders poised, and her eyes met his across the space of the busy Chicago street. She smiled, faint yet unmistakable, the kind of smile that carried more promise than pages of prose. With a small, graceful wave, she disappeared around the corner, leaving his heart unable to forget. It was fleeting but eternal, a memory that would not let him rest. That memory drove him now. He closed the watch with a quiet snap and slipped it back into his pocket, just over his heart. Straightening, he lifted his chin and regarded his reflection once more. The boy was gone. The man remained. He turned and left the room. Moments later, wheels clattered over cobblestones as his carriage jolted forward down the main street. By his side sat his best man, kilted like himself, and together they laughed nervously, caught between ceremony and destiny. The horses drew up in front of the church, its stone walls crowned with icicles that glittered like diamonds in the pale sun. Townsfolk pressed near to glimpse the first sight of the bridegroom. Descending the carriage steps, the 2 young men adjusted their jackets, tartans swaying about their knees. They ascended the broad stone stairs, their polished boots clapping against each step, until the wooden doors of the sanctuary opened, flooded with the warming scent of pine wreaths threaded about the pews. Already the organ began its slow prelude, a tide rising, filling every chamber of the church with majesty. H.J.'s heart pounded. He and his best man moved swiftly up the aisle, the stares of neighbors bearing down upon them, yet he scarcely felt the weight. He reached his place at the altar, his breath unsteady, hands clenched and unclenched with restless intensity. The music swelled. The congregation turned, and then the great doors at the back of the church were thrown open. Winter light streamed inside, dazzling, as though heaven itself had descended. Framed against its glow stood Fanny, her silk gown radiant, veil flowing like mist, her figure bathed in sunlight. She seemed not to walk, but to drift upon air, her face alight with promise, her smile reserved for him alone. In that moment, H.J. was captivated. Duty and years of toil fell away. The ambition, the mercantile, his father's stern ghosts, all diminished in her presence. Before God and the gathering, he was not merchant nor visionary, not railroad builder nor city founder. He was a man in love, wholly and irrevocably hers. And as she took her first steps down the aisle toward him, Hobart Johnstone Whitley knew every choice, every sorrow, every dream had led to this moment where the boy was gone and the man began. Come back next Wednesday to hear the next chapter of Dreamland New Beginnings, written by Dr. Galen Whitley Keith, narrated by Keith Whitley.